Ecclesiastes chapter 4, starting in verse 3. This might be the perfect chapter for where we are at as a church and as a nation right now, because it's all about people. Let's talk about that. In case this is the first episode that you're watching, my name's Larry, Family Ministry Director here at First Presbyterian Church in Bradenton, Florida. And we're walking through the book of Ecclesiastes, basically a few verses at a time. In this case, we're going to pick up in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 3, where it's all about people. Henry Cloud wrote a book called Necessary Endings. And in that book, around chapter 7, he talks about three types of people: wise people, foolish people, and evil people. And as you look at the book of Proverbs and the book of Ecclesiastes, you see these types of people talked about a lot, so we'll talk about them today. Let's get into the book of Ecclesiastes. And I saw that all labor and all achievement spring from man's envy of his neighbor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. The fool folds his hands and ruins himself. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and a chasing after the wind. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if two lie down together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. It's kind of the end of that section. Then it picks up in verse 13. Better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to take a warning. The youth may have come from prison to kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Absolutely incredible. He uses that word meaningless and chasing after the wind tons of times throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, and the whole idea behind that is under the sun, separated from God. All of these things he sees and experiences really have absolutely no point. Of course, it ends there talking about the idea of advancement, and that it really doesn't matter. You can go from nothing to great power and wealth, and it really doesn't matter if you miss the big point, which he makes that point later on in the book of Ecclesiastes. But I want to talk about those earlier verses, about those people that he's talking about, the foolish person or the wise person, and all of these dynamics. Of course, I always read Ecclesiastes through the lens of other scripture, and specifically the book of Proverbs. When I read this, I understand that he's not necessarily talking about people from an intelligence standpoint or an education standpoint, or their level of sin that they do, or how bad or good their decision making is. At the end of the day, Solomon is really talking about people's heart. Their heart really does matter. The motivation behind everything that happens. Mark Driscoll, in his study of Ecclesiastes, puts it this way, and I'm just going to read a quote from him. He says, "Wise people want to know the truth and learn from it and become more godly. Foolish people want to argue over the truth, not change, and remain stuck. And evil people hate the truth, they refuse to change, and they cause harm to others." The important thing for us at this juncture is for us to not take this information and try to figure out other people. The whole point of this is to assess ourselves, to make sure that we are on track, to make sure that we're not only wise and seeking truth, but we're in the business of applying that to our lives, and then we're able to take that, use our life to shape other people and to point them towards the truth that we've found. I don't feel we need to take time to study wise people or foolish people or evil people, because a lot of that really is common sense, and Solomon does a really good job at pointing out some things here and throughout the entire book of Proverbs for the most part. But one thing that I think that is really important in this section is he's driving home the point that friends and family, those connections are incredibly important to help us get through this life. He kind of builds through that section talking about how one person in isolation, that's not good. And then two people is definitely a better thing, but he ends the section right there. I believe it is in verse 12. Yeah, verse 12. A cord of 3 strands is very difficult to break. There's a fairly current story of a guy named Marcus Persson. He goes by the name Notch. He developed an online game system called Minecraft. If you've not heard of it, your kids or your grandkids definitely have heard of it. It became wildly popular, and he sold that platform to Microsoft for like $2.5 billion, a ridiculous amount of money. He took care of the employees at his company with that money, but he had plenty of money obviously for himself, and he went out and bought like a $70 million mansion, did all of these things. One wall of his house was a wall full of just candy. Absolutely incredible. And he would have a ton of parties and things like that. And he ends up at one point tweeting, and I'm just going to read his tweets. His first tweet says, "The problem with getting everything is that you run out of reasons to keep trying, and human interaction becomes impossible due to imbalance." His next tweet says, "I'm hanging out in Ibiza with a bunch of friends and partying with famous people. I'm able to do whatever I want, and I've never felt so isolated." Third tweet, "When we sold the company, the biggest effort went into making sure the employees got taken care of, and now they all hate me." His fourth tweet says this, "I found a great girl, but she's afraid of me and my lifestyle, and she went with a normal person instead." Here's an incredibly successful man from the outside looking in, and you see that life didn't turn out exactly as it could have or perhaps should have for him. Here's reality. People need people. It's why we enjoy table talks and small groups and discipleship classes. It's why we like to gather as a church on the weekend. There's something about corporate togetherness that is awesome. Here, right now, in April of 2020, we're not able to gather together as much. I think we have to take extra strides and make extra effort to be the type of friend that our friends need, to be the kind of neighbor that our neighbors need. There are things that we can do with phone calls and with technology to stay connected as we anticipate, as we wait for a time when things get back to normal. Church, we love you. Thank you for following us, liking. Thank you for watching everything that we're putting online right now. We are trying to honor God and do our best to offer a lot of things to keep you connected. And we appreciate you sticking with us and sticking with each other.